Whenever someone concocts a title consisting primarily of Latin words and a neologism, the audience should beware. The speaker is either attempting a display of learned acumen designed to overwhelm but not necessarily inform, or to inflict rhetorical eloquence that might persuade but is not necessarily truthful. Both instances are simply clever devices for disguising an underlying muddle. It is no different with me today. I am not even certain what I am muddled about. So let me begin by describing as clearly as I can what I am trying to think about today in my muddled way. Eric Voegelin, who was a deep and profound thinker, but rarely accused of being a clear and concise writer, begins the introduction of the first volume of his Order and History with the following brief paragraph. God and man, world and society form a primordial community of being. The community with its quaternarian structure is and is not a datum of human experience. It is a datum of experience insofar as it is known to man by virtue of his participation in the mystery of its being. It is not a datum of experience insofar as it is not given in the manner of an object of the external world, but is knowable only from the perspective of participation in it. Now, this is admittedly a tortuous collection of sentences, but Voegelin is on to something important. He goes on to explain that we are not self-contained spectators at the centers of our respective realities, but actors in the unfolding drama of being. We do not know who we are and what role we play in this drama, and we cannot know the drama of being as a whole. We are encased within this drama, for to be is to experience that which is lasting and that which is passing. Others die, and we live on. And eventually we will die while others live on. Society survives its passing individuals, and the world sees societies come and go. And God continues when his creation is no more. Consequently, to participate in being, we must experience both life and death. And in Voegelin's words, the role of existence must be played in uncertainty of its meaning, as an adventure of decision on the edge of freedom and necessity. And we create and we use symbols to express the uncertain meaning of this adventure. The question I take from Voegelin is, has technology become the dominant symbol for expressing who we think we are and are aspiring to become as late moderns in this unfolding drama? And if so, are there dangers to be noted in placing our ontological weight on this symbol, particularly in light of Voegelin's admonition that we should attune our lives to that which is lasting and not what is passing? Heidegger was quite certain that technology had already become the ontology of our age, and in many respects, I think he was right. To illustrate, try a simple exercise of describing who you are in the absence of any reference to technology. I don't think it is impossible to do, but it is a very thin account and requires the technology of language to express it. This is simply to admit that humans have been Homo faber for a very long time, creatures who are adept at making and using tools. Tools have been important symbols for aiding humans in navigating the uncertain drama of being. Indeed, technology is the symbol of mastery that humans employ in asserting who they think they are and should be. Any lingering romantic feelings for the simple pleasures of a pre-modern society were quickly dispelled a few weeks ago for me and my wife as we experienced an 18-hour power outage. As the temperature fell and I sat shivering next to a flickering candle, losing the battle against a darkening night, I decided this was not the role I wished to play in the drama of my being. I have now come to cherish electricity as a valuable tool of mastery in helping me exercise my freedom over necessity. But there is an illusion here that must be admitted. The more we assert mastery, the more we are also mastered. That is another way of saying that technology is not only useful, it is also formative. The more we use technology, the more it shapes us in its image. This was recognized by George Grant in his reply to the reassuring adage that the computer does not impose the ways it should be used upon its users. Nonsense. Otherwise, we could not use the computer to accomplish the purposes for which it was designed. Using a computer shapes us as computer users. The formative influence of technology is often subtle and unrecognized, so allow me a few examples to illustrate. I am an academic, which means that I spend most of my time reading, thinking, and writing. Oh, yes, and on teaching on occasion. Everything I read is mediated through technology. Without this reading, my thinking would be impoverished, for I would be confined to my own thoughts, which I often find boring, or the thoughts spoken by others that are usually more interesting but not always useful. Well, it is true. Everything I write is also created, dispersed, and accessed through various technologies. My time is largely spent interacting with and then creating artifacts aimed at interacting with artifacts created by other academics who, like me, have nothing better to do. To a large extent, my career is not so much a calling or vocation as is simply the artifact of my will. As I grow older, my physical survival grows increasingly dependent upon the services rendered by healthcare professionals, technicians of the body, if you will. I have several implanted devices that presumably keep me alive, and each day I partake of a small cornucopia of drugs that keep my bodily functions, well, functioning. I've also been informed that several of my body parts need to be replaced. My body is increasingly an artifact of medical skill and ingenuity. But I do not complain. To the contrary, I am grateful. Although medicine has not yet mastered finitude and mortality, it at least allows me to keep their ravages at bay a bit longer than what was afforded to my ancestors. The growing extent of this medical technological mastery is seen more broadly and vividly at the beginning and end of life. Fetal development, whether it originates inside or outside a womb, is now routinely monitored, tested, and at times terminated in response to indications of unwanted outcomes. And at the end of life, is also subjected to greater planning and control. A good death, we are told, is no longer a matter of necessity, but that of choice. So medicine now assists its patients to die at a time and means of their choosing. Both of these instances may be depicted as artifacts of the will, implemented technologically. Begetting has become making, procreation replaced by reproductive projects. Death is the last defiant act of the will that at least cheats necessity of determining how and when. If we were to extend this exercise more broadly, the formative power of technology becomes even more pronounced. I think it virtually impossible to describe the late modern societies and cultures in the absence of ubiquitous technologies such as electrical grids, transportation infrastructures, communication and information networks, healthcare, and the like. We are ill at ease without our gadgets, treating them somewhat like daemons who are crucial to our sense of individual and collective identity. To be unconnected is to be highly eccentric or worse. Again, as George Grant observed, in each lived moment of our waking and sleeping, we are technological civilization. I have admittedly portrayed the formative influence of technology in some very broad strokes. But on those rare occasions when I have done some painting, I discovered that a broad brush comes in handy when one is trying to cover a lot of space quickly. I'm using these broad strokes as a background to finally come to the core of my muddle. Namely, what to make of this purported transition from Homo Sapien to Techno Sapien. Is this a good transition? Many of my friends tell me that it is. It is just another step in the evolution of the species, only this time culture displaces biology as the driving force, and natural selection gives way to willful selection. Not to worry, as the mastery of nature and human nature that technology enables becomes more pronounced, life will get better over time. My friends also point out that I must really believe this as well, for I am as ravenous a consumer of technologies on offer as they are. Rather than being muddled, I should embrace our technological destiny. I don't buy it. The prospect of this destiny makes me itchy, but I don't know quite why. Hence my muddle. So please indulge me for a few minutes as I disclose two of my itchy spots in order to paradoxically clarify my muddle. The first itchy spot involves the notion of sin. Now, I realize that sin has fallen into public disfavor, yet I think its residue continues to exert a largely unrecognized but widespread public influence, and we particularly enjoy exposing the sins committed by others. How else to explain the accusatory rhetoric that now passes for political discourse? But I digress. For nearly 2 millennia, moral theologians have spilled a lot of ink defining and categorizing sin. But for our purposes today, 2 types will do: sins of commission and sins of omission. The former are willful acts that harm our neighbors or ourselves, whereas the latter acts are those that we fail to do. And in both instances, we can also sin against God, either through willful defiance or failing to do what is required of us. Historically, more attention has been devoted to sins of commission than omission. This is understandable, since for Christians, sin can only be understood in relation to forgiveness, and only those acts which should be punished can be forgiven. It is more clear-cut to assign blame and punishment to acts that are committed than failing to act. If I pick your pocket, for example, I am clearly culpable and deserve punishment. Whereas if I didn't try to prevent someone from picking your pocket, it is not so clear that I've even done anything wrong, though I failed you as a neighbor. I fear that in a culture increasingly dedicated to asserting greater mastery over nature and human nature, sins of omission are becoming center place. Individuals will effectively be held culpable or stigmatized by failing to assert greater mastery over their lives and circumstances when it is within their power to do so. We are already seeing subtle signs of this shift. Why are those overweight people failing to take care of themselves through proper diets and exercise? Or why is the mastery of basic computer skills a prerequisite of college admission when it is not clear that individuals unable or unwilling to surf the web are any less intelligent? I don't think it is far-fetched to worry that increasingly people will be judged to be irresponsible or worse for failing to take advantage of technological interventions and applications at their disposal. To return to the previous instances of the issues at the beginning and end of life, why did you allow the birth of a child with severe disabilities when you could have prevented it? Why are you failing to accept the offer of an assisted easy passing, since the quality of your life is so obviously diminished? Increasingly, the onus will be placed on people to justify their failures to act, and I suspect they will not be easily forgiven, if at all. Why do I find this troubling? At least by concentrating on sins of commission, there is always the possibility of restored fellowship with God and neighbor. The prospect of forgiveness and absolution is an outcome of attempting to right the wrong committed following confession, repentance, and the amendment of life. But how do I right a wrong resulting from my failure to act? If failing to prevent the birth of a defective child or using assisted dying are sins, how can I ever be forgiven or absolved, since the wrong can never be righted? Even more troubling, identifying and punishing sins of omission have always been useful tools of tyranny. The tyrant routinely punishes those who fail to conform to expected patterns of behavior and conduct. The tyrant can punish those failing to identify the misdeeds of their neighbor. The tyrant can even punish those failing to think correctly. Tyranny flourishes when people mistrust and fear one another. To be clear, I am not suggesting that a so-called technological society ends inevitably in tyranny. But I do fear that in asserting ever greater technological mastery, we may produce a people who are less trusting and forgiving. And that is not a strategy for enabling human flourishing. My second itchy spot involves distraction. Asserting greater technological mastery presumably gives us greater freedom and power. Perhaps, but it may also distract our attention from what is genuinely true and important about being human. The most alluring aspect of technology is its promise of giving us the extraordinary. In cyberspace, for instance, I can be and do whatever my heart desires. There are no limits, or at least that is the illusion I am offered. Or more expansively, we can use technology to transform ourselves into extraordinary creatures, or at least that is the illusion envisioned by the most Promethean transhumanists. In the popular press, we are bombarded with articles about an impending golden age of medicine, in which we will live long and healthy lives with enhanced physical and cognitive performance, perhaps even achieving personal immortality. Through the eventual mastery of nature and human nature, we can will ourselves to be whatever we want to be, rendering finitude and mortality boring, if not eventually irrelevant. Extraordinary. Again, I don't buy it. Because it is not the extraordinary, but in the ordinary or mundane that we learn what is most important about life. In the mind-numbing, boring, and tedious chores of taking care of ourselves and others, we catch a glimpse of what God created us to be. To illustrate, Wallace Stegner's novel, Crossing to Safety, is a story about two married couples who are best of friends. Sid and Charity have had a long and somewhat tempestuous marriage in which she has asserted nearly total control over her husband and large brood of children. Larry and Sally have also shared a long marriage, but early on she contracted polio, and Larry has devoted himself to caring for his crippled wife. At the end of the story, Charity is dying of cancer, and she calls together her friends and family to be with her during her last few days. Yet Charity closes Sid out, despite his protests, preferring the company of her daughters and Sally. Out of frustration and embittered compliance to his wife's final command, Sid tells Larry that he takes pleasure in seeing that Larry is equally addicted and dependent to his wife as he is, and that neither could possibly be unchained. Larry admits to himself that this is true, but what Sid doesn't understand is that my chains are not chains, that over the years Sally's crippling has been a rueful blessing. It has made her more than she is. It has let her give me more than she would ever have been able to give me healthy. It has taught me at least the alphabet of gratitude. What Sid perceives as chains are the bonds of imperfection that bind finite and mortal creatures together. In tending to Sally's physical needs, such as helping her get out of bed or stand up and sit down, Larry also perceives the depth of the love that they share. Because caring is not always or even a one-way street, but an exchange. Giving and receiving care is reciprocal, exposing the reciprocity that binds us together, and also the depth of one's own life within these shared bonds. As Larry reflects, you can't be close to the mortality of friends without being brought to think of your own. Being attentive to the mundane also helps to identify, solidify, and cherish what is truly and most satisfying and worthwhile, what best promotes human flourishing. To get lost in an incessant quest for fulfillment and perfection, to indulge a ravenous appetite for the extraordinary, is to lose track of what is genuinely important or significant. It is to fall victim to the illusion that a good life is only one that is bigger than life. But this entertains a deadly reversal of priorities. As C.S. Lewis observed in respect of the proper relation between the extraordinary affairs of state and the ordinary lives of its citizens, he writes, "The state exists simply to promote and to protect the ordinary happiness of human beings in this life. A husband and wife chatting over a fire, a couple of friends having a game of darts in a pub, a man reading a book in his own room or digging in his own garden. That is what the state is there for. And unless they are helping to increase and prolong and protect such moments, all the laws, parliaments, armies, courts, police, economics, etc., are simply a waste of time." This does not suggest that human flourishing occurs merely or only through the commonplace activities Lewis describes, but it does imply that if one cannot find happiness in sharing simple pleasures with friends and family, then there is a good chance that one will never be truly happy. More importantly, it reminds us that the extraordinary is not the proper end of human life to be pursued, but a means to support the ordinary, out from which the depth, breadth, and meaning of human lives emerge and unfold. In short, in the mundane, we learn that life is properly a gift of grace, not an artifact we construct. If mastery is a distraction, then we have already started down a road that is bound to lead to grave mischief. For in supposedly mastering ourselves, we will not discover those reasons and purposes for which we were created in the first place. And more distressingly, it becomes an end in itself rather than a means. To paraphrase George Grant, we will be resolute in our will to mastery, but we cannot know what that mastery is for. Or to return to Vogelin, we will deceive ourselves into believing that the passing is the lasting, and such a transposition can only disappoint, for we confuse eternity with endless time. To pose this concern is a highly speculative bioethics question. Are we better served by a healthcare system implicitly dedicated to offering its customers greatly extended, perhaps endless time of youthful vim and vigor, or by medical care that assists patients in coming to terms with creaturely finitude and mortality? Should medical technology help us become extraordinary or help keep us properly ordinary? I've come to the end of my time, and I fear I've only succeeded in making my muddle more muddled. So one last attempt to describe what I am worrying about as concisely as possible. I am very much a man of this present age. I consume ravenously all the material comforts afforded by wondrous technologies, especially those I can obtain from my healthcare provider. But I am also a Christian, and I am troubled that something is not quite right in unwittingly becoming a Techno Sapien. I want to attune my life to the lasting and not the passing, but I fear I am botching it. I am evidently also a man of weak faith. I want to follow the one who is the way, the truth, and the life, but my disordered desire, or what Iris Murdoch would call my big fat ego, keeps getting in the way. I want to make and master my life rather than have it formed in obedience to my Creator and Redeemer. I am easily distracted and pay insufficient attention to what is most truly important in life. The allure of seeking the passing, masquerading as the lasting, is hard to resist. I need guidance, and with apologies to St. Paul, wretched man that I am, who will rescue me from my muddle? Perhaps in the following discussion, you will give me some guidance, for which I would be much obliged. Thank you.